channel. Today's video is going to be all about best practice tips for knitters. This is going to be the first video in a series, and this is going to be primarily for new knitters. Of course, I hope everyone watches and enjoys it, but these first set of tips are primarily for people who are pretty new to knitting. So yeah, before we get started, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joining me today. I really appreciate you spending some time with me. If you are new, consider subscribing. That would be super awesome. And also like this video or give it a thumbs up if you like it. If you're interested in finding me across social media, you can go to the link tree below. I'm on Ravelry, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I also have a yarn shop, Train Trick Fiber Designs, where I sell artisan hand-dyed yarns. And yeah, all the clickable links are at knitinthezone.com and also in the link tree below. My very first tip is to swatch. So if you're brand new to knitting, you probably have heard that term thrown around a little bit, but you might not really know what it means. So swatching is whenever you actually just knit a square and you try to see if your gauge is like the designer's gauge. Your gauge may not be like the designer's. Many times it will not be, and that is okay, and that is why we swatch. So what you want to do is just see how many inches you're supposed to knit for your swatch. So if it says 4 inches, you want to make your swatch 5 by 5. And the reason you do that is because you want to measure in the middle. You don't want to measure that last little bit on the end where it rolls up. You start with the needle size that the designer recommends and then go up or down depending on, if you're off or not. Also, read through what they say the swatch should be. Is the swatch just stockinette? Is the swatch in ribbing? Is it in pattern? If it says it's in pattern and it's a lacy shirt or lacy something, you're probably going to want to actually swatch in that lace pattern so you can actually see how that lines up with their measurements. The other thing is read and see, did they block it? If they blocked it, then you're going to need to block your swatch before you measure, because blocking generally makes things grow a little bit. Next tip is to have a lifeline. So lifeline would be like a piece of thread, a piece of contrasting color yarn. You can even use dental floss, and all you do is you feed that through a finished row. So you don't want to do this every single row. There's really no reason to. You want to do this, if you're brand new to knitting, I would say maybe every 20 rows or so, or if you're trying out something new like lace or cables or something like that, then maybe, every 10 rows or so might be an okay place. All you do is you actually just feed that through on either like a tapestry needle. If you're using circular needles, a lot of them will have a hole and you can just tie a piece of string through there and feed it through as you knit your row. After you've got it through one row, then you want to put like a stitch marker or something on either side so it doesn't pull through. The next tip is to have a crochet hook. So I just keep a small crochet hook. Whatever size crochet hook you have or can find would be fine. It doesn't really matter. But what you need a crochet hook for is sometimes you will drop a stitch. And I don't care who you are, I don't care how long you've been knitting, you will drop a stitch at some point. And there is no shame in that. But you need a way to pick it up. And whenever you drop a stitch, number one, a lot of times we're in a panic, especially if you're new and you've not ever experienced it before, you're gonna be frazzled. So having a way to pick up that stitch and stop it from going further down is a huge lifesaver. So even if you have your lifelines, if you drop a stitch, you can recover and actually not have to tear back those rows. So having a crochet hook is a great way to help you do that. The other thing you can do put it on a locking stitch marker. So if you pick up your stitch and then you're like, oh crap, what do I do now? If you have a locking stitch marker handy, you can just put that stitch on the locking stitch marker, hold on a minute, figure out what to do, look online, figure out how you actually feed that through, get it back to where it's supposed to be. You can easily fix your problem. My next tip is to have a way to count your rows. You can use anything from row counters like these. You can just use a tally system on a piece of paper. There's apps for your phone. Doesn't matter, any price point. Doesn't matter if your price point is literally a piece of paper and a pen. You have an option. So all you want to do is be able to count whenever you get to the end of a row. I love these kinds of row counters. So this is a ring row counter. It just goes on your finger and it has a little button. It's digital. So that's one option. The other option, these go on the end of your needle. If you're knitting with like a straight needle particularly, these are great. So yeah, you just want a way to count those rows. There are apps for your phone too, but like I said, even just having a tally system on a piece of paper is fine. You just need a way to keep up with your rows. The next tip is to have stitch markers. So we already covered locking stitch markers a little bit, but we're gonna go into more detail. So stitch markers look like this, or they can be metal. They can be really any type of small ring. What it is, it's a little plastic or metal ring and it goes on your needles. Obviously, beginning of a row, if you're knitting in the round, you want to know where the beginning of your row is. If you're knitting lace or something, you might want to keep those sections separated so you know where the beginning of that lace section is and where the beginning of the next one is, so on and so forth. Same thing for cables. Sometimes we need to have our sides marked if we're making a shirt in the round. So there's a lot of reasons that you would need stitch markers, but always have stitch markers handy. I think it's a good idea to have both kinds of stitch markers, locking stitch markers and regular stitch markers. The locking ones are great for, like I said earlier, if you drop a stitch and you need to pick that up, you can hook that sucker on there and just figure it out and not have to panic. These are also great for using for a beginning of the row marker or round marker if you have other things marked, because this is clearly different than this. Next tip is read all the way through your pattern before you cast on, and also to mark whatever things apply to you in that pattern. If you're knitting like a hat or like a scarf or a shawl, then everything's probably going to apply to you. But if you're knitting a sweater or socks or something that has different sizes available, then my favorite thing to do is to actually go through and circle the ones that apply to me. So sometimes patterns will give you a bunch of extra pages and not everything applies to you. Sometimes if it's like a lace pattern or a cable pattern, they'll have different charts for different sizes. So you may want to go through and see which ones apply to you before you start. The other thing is it'll have a different stitch count. So if you're making an extra small sweater, obviously the medium and the large numbers don't apply to you. So you just want to go through and circle the things that do apply to you so you know to pay attention. Okay, so Bella's joining me now. She was up and making noises, so I picked her up, so here we go. So my next tip is to read all the way through your pattern before you cast on. You're wanting to look for a few things here. You want to look for things that say like at the same time. You're gonna find this more so with sweater patterns. Cardigans, I've really noticed that a lot on. I'm sure there's other types of patterns that would have at the same time things going on. So you're gonna wanna look for that stuff, circle it, highlight it, whatever you need to do so that it grabs your attention. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. Like I said in the beginning, this is a series. This is the first in a series of knitting tips and tricks videos. So I hope you guys found it helpful. Hit the button below to subscribe and also hit the bell if you want notifications. I do post videos weekly, so I hope you guys will join me again. Thanks for watching and have an awesome week. Bye.